It appears that the U.S. military is going to be sending troops, actual boots on the ground to Syria. And the dynamics in the region are very interesting. Is quite an understatement. We'll be pulling up some maps to discuss the location of where the U.S. troops are going to be and the implications, actually what it means. But the U.S. military has been spotted actually in a Syrian town called Manbij. It's really close, conspicuously close to Turkish-controlled territory. So they spotted around 200 Marines as well as howitzers, according to the Washington Post, have been spotted in the city. These forces have placed themselves inside of Kurdish-controlled territory. It appears that they've been placed there in order to prevent fighting between U.S. allies of Turkey and Kurdish militants. And before we go too much further, I actually want to pull up, and I apologize to the radio audience, and I'll do my best to describe it as much as I can. But I want to pull up two two maps, so that you can see the area that they will be in. On your screen, you'll see the yellow territory at the top. That's controlled by Kurdish forces. And there's a blue area just to the northeast, the northernmost portion. That's controlled by Turkish-backed fighters. And then in the yellow region, just on the other side, again, controlled by Kurdish fighters. This is all within, of course, in the midst, rather, of the Syrian civil war. I want to zoom in on that map so you can see the hand-drawn arrow that I drew, so that you can see the town of Manbij, where U.S. forces have already been spotted. It is the first major city on that side of Turkish-controlled forces. So Turkey is controlling Turkish-backed forces in the blue region. On the yellow side of this map that's on the screen, Kurdish territory, and U.S. troops are there in this town, in the first major city. Looking at the location of the U.S. troops, it seems as though the troops there may be serving as a tripwire. And by that, consider like the U.S. forces in Berlin during the Cold War, or U.S. forces between North and South Korea. They're sort of as a buffer. The latest dispatch brings the number of U.S. boots on the ground in Syria close to more than 700. U.S.-backed Syrian forces are getting closer to launching an all-out assault on the Islamic State's group de facto capital of Raqqa. And this is the general justification of the troops and the addition of the troops. The conflict in the region has been for a while a tremendous quagmire. Adding the U.S. troops there adds a very unique dynamic, and it seems as though it puts more pressure on the Turkish-backed forces. Turkey has suggested that its own military and its allied Syrian forces should mount the fight, and that the U.S.-backed Syrian Kurds should be excluded. And so it seems there is a desire by Turkish forces to keep that northern region from becoming one contiguous territory controlled by Syrian Kurds because of Turkey's ongoing tensions that they have with Kurdish Turks. Just the idea in general that we've discussed in times past, we've discussed how complicated it is for the Kurds to be some of the most reliable forces in the region to actually fight back against ISIS. The problem is that the Kurdish forces don't represent an existing state, yet they are very highly organized. The Kurdish people are highly organized. They have the ability to defend their borders. They have the ability to provide services to their people. And so in many ways, they function as a state within the region. But the problem is Kurdish ethnic Kurds, their quote unquote territory really intersects with a lot of states, including Turkey. And so for the Kurds to get any contiguous territory in Syria controlled really presents a threat, an ongoing threat to any other region that is dealing. And when I say region, let me be more specific. Any other territory. No, I have to be even more specific. Any other nation that has ethnic Kurds in their borders. Because it's quite literally like a nation growing within your nation, and this becomes a threat to and not just the general threat. And when I say threat, it depends on which side of the aisle you're on, right? So in many regards, it could be it's for the United States, it's a positive thing because the Kurds seem to be a reliable ally. They're fierce in the fight. I mean, the Peshmerga, they're fearless in the fight against ISIS. Some of the best fighters, I think the Republican Party, if you want to take them, for example, they definitely said the only thing that they would do differently would be to arm the Kurds in this fight. And so, but from the opposite side, it's all about your vantage point. This is a threat to Iraq. Right. This is a threat to Turkey because of their ethnic Kurds that reside within their territories. So Turkish Prime Minister said, quote, if the U.S. were to prefer terrorist organizations over Turkey in the fight against ISIS, that would be their own decision. But that wouldn't be something we would consent to. And again, this is a matter of language, right? Because to some people, a terrorist is a freedom fighter. A freedom fighter is a terrorist. That standard dichotomy. But without getting into that, there is a great amount of tension between the Turkish-backed forces in Syria, and the ethnic Kurds that are in Syria that have controlled their territory. They fought back against ISIS. So in a way, it doesn't appear to be an issue of the Assad regime being concerned about this Kurdish-controlled territory. It's really Turkey who has some territory, or at least they have rebels who are controlling a region of Syria in the north. They're really the ones who see the Kurds as the threat. So when we talk about the U.S. forces being a tripwire, in a sense, they're not really there as a tripwire. If you buy into that theory, they would not be there as a tripwire against Assad to trigger a conflict between the U.S. and Assad, and then by proxy, the U.S. and Assad and Russia. It's really there to put a buffer between the Kurds and Turkey, to say to Turkey, the U.S., who has really been backing Kurdish forces for some time, as much as they could, this is a clear statement to Turkey that the U.S. is behind these forces. And by partnering with the Kurds in the Raqqa assault, the U.S. also risks being seen as entering into an indirect alliance with Russia and Assad's government, which it backs. So this becomes an even more complicated situation, as if Syria was not already complicated enough. But I think this is fascinating. Yes, and you guys have to forgive me. Sometimes international affairs is just fascinating, just on the merits of it. And we could talk about all the other complications that get involved with it. The fact that we actually are putting more boots on the ground. The fact that this could escalate into something. But the irony of this conversation is that they would be indirectly, and the U.S. troops would be in an indirect alliance with Assad on this fight against ISIS. And if they are there to serve as a tripwire, they are not there to serve as a tripwire for Russia/Assad. They're there to serve as a tripwire to one of our allies, Turkey, to lay off the Kurdish-backed forces in the North Syria. So really fascinating stuff happening over there. And by fascinating, it is fascinating. But again, in the midst of this, it is a full-blown civil war where a lot of lives are being lost, and the U.S. troops being there as you can see, just by virtue of the little bit that we discussed, that greatly complicates the situation even more.